Breaking news! The United States has launched a covert military operation, codenamed Operation Tlaloc's Fury, targeting cartel strongholds in northern Mexico. Just before dawn, Special Ops Forces reportedly targeted key strongholds linked to top figures in the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels. Precision drone strikes allegedly hit fentanyl labs and arms caches, while ground teams executed rapid strikes to neutralize high-ranking cartel leaders. This dramatic offensive marks a new approach to the threat posed by Mexican cartels, whose control over drug routes and migrant flows has escalated U.S. security concerns. Sources say Operation Tlaloc's Fury aims to cut at the heart of cartel power. A U.S. Defense Department official briefly stated, "The cartels have become a clear and present threat to American lives and national security. We're here to end their reign of terror." Well, this hasn't happened yet, but with rising dysfunction on the US border and a spiraling drug crisis, it might not be far off. So how did the cartels gain such power, and what turned a Mexican battle into a global threat?
And from the US southward to Mexico, where violence has hit alarming new heights.
More than 100 people are dead or missing in Mexico's western Sinaloa state since rival factions of the Sinaloa cartel began clashing.
The drug cartels and their allies have the blood of countless millions on their hands. Millions and millions of families and people are being destroyed.
Mexico's mountainous terrain, covering about 70% of the country, has long isolated regions, hindering transportation and unification. If flattened, its landmass would exceed that of Asia, underscoring its rugged vastness. Unlike the US, with navigable rivers and multiple deep-water ports, Mexico relies on a single major port in Veracruz. Historically, this port has been more of a vulnerability than an asset, serving as an invasion route from Hernán Cortés's conquest in 1519 to US landings in 1847 and 1914. The Plateau region, home to the Aztec Empire and now Mexico City, remains Mexico's cultural and political core. But these highlands are isolated by mountains, limiting the government's reach, fostering local self-reliance and skepticism of central authority. Adding to these geographic challenges is Mexico's colonial legacy. Unlike the US, shaped by Britain's decentralized rule, Mexico inherited Spain's centralized extractive system, later complicated by US interference. This history of territorial loss and economic influence has left Mexico grappling with inequality and complex governance. The rise of Mexico's modern cartels began in the 1980s, with Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, or El Padrino, or the Godfather. A former police officer, Félix Gallardo unified traffickers under one organization, controlling smuggling routes and collaborating with Colombian cartels. To avoid conflict, he divided Mexico into territories overseen by trusted allies, laying the groundwork for today's powerful regional cartels. After his arrest in 1989, his empire fractured, and these territories became independent, sparking fierce rivalries among groups like the Sinaloa, Jalisco New Generation, CJNG, and Los Zetas. Over the years, these cartels became more militarized, using Mexico's rugged geography to establish strongholds beyond federal reach. The conflict escalated in 2006 with the government's militarized crackdown, and despite billions in US aid, over 431,000 homicides have been recorded since.
There's a lot to pay attention to in Mexico. 60,000 Mexican military and police are fighting against the 5 major drug cartels, which control lucrative smuggling routes into the US. They've managed to arrest some top traffickers, but new, more ruthless leaders have filled the vacuum.
Mexico's cartel landscape is dominated by 2 primary forces: the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG, and the Sinaloa Cartel, CDS. The CJNG, led by the elusive Nemesio El Mencho Oseguera Cervantes, is known for its violent expansion, trafficking of synthetic drugs like fentanyl and meth, and engaging in kidnapping, extortion, and oil pipeline tapping, often ensnaring local farmers and businesses in areas like Tierra Caliente. Oseguera has even targeted officials, assassinating the judge who approved his son's extradition to the US. The Sinaloa cartel, once unrivaled, now faces internal divisions and fierce competition with CJNG. Led by figures by Ismael El Mayo Zambada and El Chapo's sons, Los Chapitos, the cartel has splintered, sparking violent turf wars, especially in Mexico's west and northwest. Notable for their influence in drug trafficking and other criminal enterprises, the CDS has repeatedly demonstrated its power, most notably in 2019 when Los Chapitos forces wreaked havoc in Culiacan to secure one of their leaders' release. Other groups like Los Zetas, the Gulf Cartel, and the Juarez Cartel are smaller but still powerful, fueling the country's high homicide rate.
Violence paralyzed the streets of a Mexican city yesterday as security forces traded gunfire with heavily armed members of a drug cartel. The son of the notorious drug kingpin El Chapo was taken into custody, then let go.
Large-scale violence often follows the arrest of cartel leaders, like the August 2022 capture of CJNG's El Doble R, which triggered chaos across multiple states. These incidents reveal the cartel's swift mobilization power and highlight the government's struggle to regain control, often relying on military and National Guard intervention. In recent years, cartels like CJNG and the Sinaloa cartel have transformed into militarized forces, using advanced tactics, heavy weaponry, and military-style training. Armed with rocket-propelled grenades, 50 caliber rifles, and improvised armored vehicles, they operate with battlefield firepower. In regions like Michoacán, CJNG deploys narco tanks and digs defensive trenches, clashing fiercely with rivals and self-defense groups. Their weapons come from U.S. gun trafficking, looted Central American armories, and corrupt officials, allowing them to outgun local police and secure key territories.
I think the flow is this. Drugs make their way north, and firearms and money make their way south. 70% of all firearms come from the north, from the United States.
CJNG further asserts its dominance with PR videos showcasing commando units in armored formations, sending a clear message to both rivals and the government: they're here to stay. Mexico has tried fighting back, deploying specialized units like the National Guard to take on the cartels, but local corruption often eats away at these efforts. Cartels see the cracks and take full advantage, setting up bunkers and barricades to lock down control over key territories. And it's not just the big players anymore. Splinter groups and smaller cartels are taking violence to new levels, copying tactics from their larger rivals. Beyond drugs, these billion-dollar empires have branched out into human smuggling, arms dealing, and even oil theft, building a network that challenges government authority and regional stability like never before. Drug trafficking is the cartel's bread and butter, generating billions every year. Mexican networks control much of the cocaine, meth, and fentanyl flooding the US, Canada, and Europe, with analysts valuing this trade at around $13 billion annually. Powerhouses like the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels lead the charge, pushing high-profit drugs like fentanyl that fuel the US opioid crisis. But it doesn't stop with drugs. Cartels have made human smuggling a core part of their business, with estimates showing that they made an incredible $13 billion in 2021 from smuggling migrants across the US-Mexico border, a shocking increase from $500 million just a few years earlier. This shift highlights the cartel's ability to adapt and find new revenue streams, exploiting the desperation of migrants trying to reach safety and stability. Cartels are deeply involved in weapons trafficking, arming themselves with military-grade weapons that fuel brutal conflicts across Mexico. Studies estimate that over 200,000 firearms are smuggled into Mexico from the US each year, with about 70% of the guns seized in Mexico tracing back to the US. Cartels have turned oil theft, or huachicol, into a billion-dollar industry, siphoning about $3 billion annually from Mexico's state-owned oil facilities like Pemex. This large-scale theft cripples refinery operations, disrupts legitimate industries, and creates fuel shortages that impact ordinary citizens. In 2019 alone, the government reported around 42 illegal taps per day, particularly in Puebla, Hidalgo, and Guanajuato, where local economies have even formed around this black market.
Mexico is also trying to cash in on its lucrative oil business, opening up the country's crude market to foreign investors. But as the world's biggest oil companies try to expand there, the country's state-run Pemex is struggling with oil theft.
The cartel's control over such resources deepens their hold on Mexico's economy, diverting billions from public services and amplifying the country's infrastructure vulnerabilities. All of this is happening even while the US is investing billions in security reforms, development, and border security to curb cartel power and stem the flow of drugs into American cities. Despite over $1 trillion spent on its own war on drugs, demand for substances like cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl remains high, fueling cartel profits and making Mexico's drug war a shared crisis. So, while US-Mexico cooperation on anti-cartel efforts is frequent, it's often fraught with tension. The recent U.S. arrest of a former Mexican defense minister sparked diplomatic friction, highlighting Mexico's sensitivity toward American involvement. Each Mexican administration has tried different strategies, from military crackdowns to economic development. However, President López Obrador's hugs not bullets policy has faced criticism for its lack of impact, further straining U.S.-Mexico relations. Could the US take military action against Mexican cartels? It's a question gaining ground as the fentanyl crisis deepens and border instability worsens. Figures like former President Trump and GOP lawmakers have proposed special forces raids on cartel leaders, reminiscent of US tactics in the Middle East. Supporters say decapitation strategies could destabilize cartels, but critics argue similar efforts in Colombia only led to temporary power shifts. Ideas like drone strikes on fentanyl labs and trafficking routes also raise concerns about collateral damage, risking US-Mexico relations, especially if conducted without Mexico's consent. There's also talk of authorizing a new AUMF, authorization for use of military force against the cartels. This proposal is controversial, potentially placing Mexico in the crosshairs of the US military as if it were a hostile state, which critics say ignores the political and social complexities in Mexico. Representative Dan Crenshaw has suggested that the Colombia model for combating Mexico's cartel violence, proposing US air support, intelligence sharing, and resources for Mexican forces. This approach mirrors Plan Colombia, launched in 2000 with $12 billion in US aid to weaken Colombia's cocaine production and guerrilla groups through military and economic support. Plan Colombia achieved a 90% drop in kidnappings, reduced homicides, and strengthened Colombia's military, but it fell short of ending drug trafficking. While coca production initially dropped, it quickly rebounded, reaching record highs by 2020. Colombia remains the world's top cocaine producer, with cartels adapting and fragmenting into smaller, resilient factions. Applying the Colombia model in Mexico could be even tougher. Unlike in Colombia, Mexican cartels are deeply embedded in local communities and hold strong influence over local authorities, making military interventions a lot more complicated. Add Mexico's rugged terrain and regional isolation, and the challenges multiply. While Plan Colombia may have cut down urban violence, it didn't dismantle the drug trade and brought new social and environmental issues with it. In Mexico, this approach risks just shifting the violence around without any real lasting results. Some experts suggest a less confrontational path, ramping up cross-border intelligence sharing. By working closely with Mexican authorities, the US could help target cartel operations more surgically. But even that's tricky, as cartel infiltration in Mexican institutions means intelligence efforts would need careful US oversight. Ultimately, the violence in Mexico is a cross-border crisis fueled by global demand, which cartels thrive on to extend their tentacles deep into different industries and across borders. As long as there's a market, cartels will meet it, making Mexico's battle a global struggle. This, combined with Mexico's rugged geography and history of instability, mean lasting change is rare. Likewise, insurgent groups across the world have proven remarkably resilient even when subject to decapitation strikes, so America's challenges at the southern border aren't disappearing anytime soon.